After the end of Sons of Liberty, the Metal Gear timeline was split into two, Snake and Big Boss. This marked the beginning of the Metal Gear chronology. This first entry in the Big Boss trilogy would see a tonal shift from previous games, as well as a change in locale and a step back in time. Not to mention the new focus on survival mechanics. This would be a totally new Metal Gear experience, and for some it stands today as the quintessential example of a great Metal Gear game. But why? What makes this game any better than those that came before or after it? I think the answer lies in the tone. I can't speak for the original Metal Gear games, but the previous two had an overall darker and more dramatic tone, as did the following games. Not that there weren't silly or light moments throughout every game, it wouldn't be a Kojima game if it were 100% po-faced, but Snake Eater embraced its campy and theatrical aspects. This, I believe, is what elevated it in some people's minds to Kojima's best project.
But you're so supreme. I give my life not for honor, but for you. In my time, there'll be no one else. Crime, it's the way I fly to you. I'm still in a dream, Snake Eater.
After the massive successes of both previous games, there was definitely demand for another installment. There were those who felt betrayed by the bait-and-switch that was Raiden in MGS2 and wanted what they considered a proper Metal Gear sequel, with Snake back in the driver's seat. And those who loved Metal Gear Solid 2, well, it's easy to imagine why they'd want more Metal Gear. So Konami Computer Entertainment Japan got to work on the next chapter in the Metal Gear saga. In the early stages, Kojima planned to step back from the series and hand the reins of the project over to other members of his team, but he eventually decided this wasn't going to work. Something similar would happen with the next game as well. Once again, this sequel would turn out differently than anyone would expect. In fact, it was a prequel, and it took place largely outside? In the jungles of Russia? Well, at least we get to sort of play as Snake again. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Snake is pretty much the same as Snake, minus the eye. Kojima actually said he felt kind of bad about how much some people hated Raiden, so this game was sort of an apology to those people. And so we got a Bond-esque spy thriller with proto-Metal Gears and the usual cast of colorful antagonists. Many people hold this entry in very high regard, myself included. But why? Well, let's take a look at the thing. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. We begin by jumping back to the Cold War, exactly 1 year after Kojima's birth, yes really, where Big Boss, at the time known as Naked Snake, has been tasked with rescuing a Soviet scientist named Sokolov and bringing him back to the States. All this goes awry when his mentor, the boss, suddenly defects to the Soviet Union, spanks his ass, and gives nukes to a psychotic Tesla coil. This nutjob then drops a nuke on his own soil because he thinks he's in Texas, and America is framed for it. Woof. Time for take two. This time, Snake has to eliminate the entirety of the Cobra unit, including the boss, the only person he looks up to, and the mother of special forces, to prove the US's innocence, lest another war break out. And so he makes his way through the jungles, swamps, mountains, and rivers of Russia. Never comes across any snow, though. Anyway, he meets plenty of charismatic foes along the way, stops the big bad mecha tank, and even makes a new best friend and finds a partner. But in the end, he has to kill the person he cares about the most, Her memory is tarnished, and his new partner betrays him and disappears. I cry every time. Oversimplification aside, the broad strokes of the plot sound fairly straightforward, but it's in the details that things get more bizarre. Metal Gear Solid 3 is an apology, a fresh start, and a change of pace. For 15 years, Metal Gear was mostly about Solid Snake infiltrating these indoor facilities in a grim, dark world that's constantly on the brink of nuclear destruction and mecha terrorism. Now we're stepping back to a simpler time, when nuclear destruction is still a strong possibility, but everybody's still having fun. Look at this guy. Tell me he's not having fun. His name is The Pain, but he seems to be having a blast. In Snake Eater, there's an overall lighter tone. There are still stakes, and the melodrama is as strong as ever, but the journey is just more fun than what came before. For example, unlike the last two games, every major antagonist, with the exceptions of the boss and the Fury, has an inherently silly or fun quality to them. We've already seen The Pain. He's living his best life with all of his Hornet friends. Then there's the Fear.
The fear!
He seems to get so much enjoyment from putting on his little show, giving you these hallucinations, doing his little limb-breaking party trick, jumping around like a maniac, whatever the fuck this situation is with his tongue. He ain't doing this for the paycheck, it's for the love. In the end, there's a laundry list of silly shit you can do or see with this guy. Donald Trump here has plenty of his own quirks, and while the boss encounter with Asaro is pretty edgy boy, there are some hidden scenes where he's pretty much cheering you on with a cheeky grin. And then there's Ocelot, our fresh-faced major with a major crush on Johnny Boy. The devs took Ocelot, an already ostentatious villain, and gave him a totally new spin that is unique from what he would become, yet still feels fun and zany. And it's easy to believe he would become the Ocelot of the previous games, but maybe not so much the 80s Ocelot. The boss and the Fury are the two most dramatic and stern bosses, and as a result I think the Fury is the least impactful boss we see. Most of what he says doesn't even really make sense. I'm not even sure why he's mad. I can kind of see what they were going for here, but I don't think they hit the mark on this one. The boss works much better for a multitude of reasons, chiefly that the entire game has been building up to the final battle with her, and the battle itself is generally better executed. But overall, the idea is that while your enemies all pose a threat, each of them has quirks and silly bits of design that serve to keep the tone lighter than it would be otherwise. This isn't unique to the enemies either. Nearly every character has their fun moments, even Snake himself. The Solid Snake that we were familiar with was stoic, reserved. He was there to get the job done, whatever it might be. Naked Snake has interests, or obsessions more like, and he's not shy about them.
So how do they taste?
Snake,
What?
they're rats.
I know what they are. Do they taste okay?
He can be kind of dense at times. As a result, he's a much more lovable, charming version of the Snake we know. I think it's a pretty good word for this game overall. Charming. Sometimes tense, occasionally dark, but overall, quite charming.
To capitalism!
This is where Snake Eater doesn't differ all that much from the other entries tonally. Every Metal Gear Solid has quirky, silly, and sometimes obscure mechanics and gameplay moments that are often entirely optional, like doing 100 pull-ups so that you can do more consecutive pull-ups, or playing a cassette tape out loud to make enemy soldiers fall asleep on the spot, or playing Oishi 2 Hanseikatsu during this secret scene with the MGS4 bosses that you can only get to if you wait 2 minutes during the post-fight Moanfest instead of finishing them off. Every game in the series has a myriad of toys and scenarios for you to play with and create these interesting moments. The kinds of moments you can tell your friends about later. Did you hear what Ocelot says if you shoot him with drinks? Did you know if you wear the Otacon camo in Chapter 3, you can just go wherever you want without guards bothering you? Oh, and you get the camo by bumping into him during one of the briefing cutscenes with the little robot. Many of these largely unexplained moments and mechanics are sometimes just made to be funny, and sometimes they're actually useful and provide new ways to play the game and make it more interesting than pointing a gun at every soldier's head and pressing the go to sleep button. For example, Snake Eater introduced close quarters combat. Incidentally, that's a bad name. It implies that any combat that involves melee would be considered close quarters combat. It's not a proprietary phrase. That's like developing a special sniper rifle and calling it the sniper rifle. Anyway, the previous games had combat in close quarters. You could punch dudes, kick dudes, choke dudes out, hold dudes up, but that wasn't CQC. With CQC, you can punch dudes, kick dudes, choke dudes out, hold dudes up. It's entirely different. Joking aside, there are a few more options with this style. You can use dudes as meat shields, throw dudes to the ground, and most importantly, you can interrogate dudes.
When R1 is displayed in the polygon demo, press the first-person view button to...
The nice thing about this is that you can learn about a lot of the mechanics you may not have thought about otherwise, or maybe they'll tell you about a secret item or area you didn't know about before. It's basically a channel for the devs to tell you about all these secrets they left for you. Personally, I ignored most of the CQC stuff for a long time, and I would attribute that partially to the controls. Like the games before it, MGS3 has some dated and somewhat obtuse controls. Even the act of shooting is somewhat unintuitive and clumsy. The idea is that you press square to aim and release to shoot. Fine. But if you change your mind, you have to slowly release square. And I swear, no matter how slowly I release that damn button, it only works about half the time. And it's different for automatic weapons. For those who half press square to aim, and full press to shoot. At least in this game they got rid of the requirement for an additional button press to walk while aiming. Anyway, I'm sort of off topic again. My point is that Snake Eater also overcomes these gameplay issues with its creative and comical mechanics. Stuff like dressing up as Volgan's secret lover to get a few extra jabs at him in his boss fight, or wearing an outfit that causes enemies to begrudgingly cease fire on you. For all the awkwardness of its controls, and some of the less popular aspects of its gameplay, like the amount of time spent in menus, which I personally didn't mind too much, Metal Gear Solid 3 offers so many interesting little moments for you to experience, not just in its cutscenes, but in the actual gameplay. This game wears its inspiration on its sleeve. Actually, no. It's more like it's printed across the torso.
007 is the biggest thing to come out of England since the Mayflower. Tom was one of the unlucky tunnels. It was discovered by the Nazis before it was finished.
This is true for most of Kojima's games, but it seems particularly apparent and often spelled out in this game, as well as MGS5. The strongest and most prevalent source of inspiration is obviously the 007 series. Even if you somehow miss the strong similarities in certain interactions and character types, of course the intro, those who save the game with any regularity will get a heaping helping of Bond talk.
Maybe if you change your code name to 00 Snake.
Teacher.
You know, I'm starting to get the impression that Kojima likes movies.
Snake, have you ever seen For a Fistful of Dollars?
But even with all this strong homage, the story of this game manages to be its own thing. It borrows a lot of things, but it doesn't take too much from any one place to just be a ripoff. And I think the large number of movie references and homages is another point in this game's favor, paired with its tone. In a more dramatic game, it can seem a bit gauche or corny, and it still does here, but that works. Snake Eater exists in a world of the gauche and corny, and it's proud of it. So why not talk about a bunch of old movies and jump off that waterfall like in that one movie? Have that fight across a ravine, or the one in a field of white flowers. Nothing is off the table because the table is actually a bowl. And it's just collecting all these ideas and sources of inspiration and running with them. But the tone is crucial here. The Phantom Pain has a similar amount of film and literary references and homages in it, and I don't feel they're nearly as welcome in that world, which is wholly different from Snake Eater's. This brings me to the writing. It Hideo Kojima has long been touted as something of a video game messiah, an auteur, a thinker, a genius, and any number of other superlatives. And I will not deny that the man has talent, a keen sense of vision, strong leadership, and a large involvement in nearly every aspect of his projects. So I'm told. Which is laudable because there are so many aspects to making the kind of games he does. Gameplay, writing, cutscenes, music, promotional stuff. He even edits the damn trailers himself. And it always shows. Kojima does not have subtlety. He has something called subtlety. Kojima sees that silent B and says, "Why are we ignoring this? This needs exhibition and explanation." He approaches people and says, "Hey, did you know there's a B in subtlety? I have a whole bunch of exposition explaining how and why, and I'm sure you'd love to hear it." Kojima and his team have done some incredible things for the medium that have shaped it in undeniable ways. The Metal Gear series will be remembered for a long time, and for good reason. But to be honest, Kojima's writing ain't good. It's not even good for a video game, whatever that means, especially in recent years as game writing has improved and his has seemingly gotten worse. But even in the 90s and 2000s, there were some absurd and ridiculous things in Kojima's games. And I mean, it works sometimes, in its own way, but sometimes it just doesn't. There's even this theory that in the first 3 Metal Gear Solids, there was another writer by the name of Tomokazu Fukushima who was the secret, unsung genius, or at least that he was crucial in shaping Kojima's ideas, maybe shutting down his most absurd ones. I won't get into it too much, but I would recommend looking into it if your interest is piqued. He's not around anymore, and Kojima's writing has since dropped off a lot, in my opinion. Coincidence? It could be. I'll never know. What I do know is that as much as I enjoyed and loved MGS1 and MGS2, stepping back and analyzing them, they're pretty ridiculous. Cheesy, ham-fisted, overly self-indulgent. Again, I want to reiterate, I loved and still love these games. But just look at every tragic romance that Otacon has. It plays out the same every time. Girl he likes dies, he sobs his eyes out, and then he regains himself and does something to help Snake on his mission. It's cheesy and overwrought every time. Maybe the least so in the first game. Then there's everything having to do with Vulcan Raven. His backstory, his telling of Snake's backstory, and the fact that you take out his tank with grenades, like that's the canon way that happens. Not to mention every other time Snake single-handedly takes out helicopters or Metal Gears on foot, and the time Raiden takes out a jet in the second game. Don't even get me started on Liquid Snake. He's literally an evil British twin, and he's always spouting this stuff about genes, at least in the first game. In the second game, he's all about taking Metal Gear Ray and not much else. And then there's Big Mama. Oh my god, talk about an exposition machine. She spends her entire screen time either reciting lore, being dramatically poetic for the sake of it, or being Kojima's mouthpiece. Did I mention I like these games? My point, which I'm taking my sweet time to make, is that Metal Gear Solid 3 has a couple of great things going for it from a writing perspective that puts it a step above the others for a lot of people. The first is that there's no baggage. I think a lot of issues you could point to with all the following games is that they have way too much lore weighing them down. Various things have to be included because they were in the previous game, and every game that's made is supposed to be the last one, so each new entry that wasn't supposed to exist has to continue a coherent timeline somehow. Mechanics and character traits that aren't present in one game suddenly pop up in another with no regard for chronology. Some things end up getting retconned for one reason or another. These are all things that huge franchises have to deal with. Creating a piece of art that is successful and memorable and is something its creators can be truly proud of, especially in the world of video games, is a gargantuan task. Making a sequel that continues that success without retreading old ground, compromising integrity, or disappointing its audience is an even taller order. Making 5 sequels that meet or exceed the acclaim and quality of the first is practically impossible, especially when they're all direct continuations of one another as opposed to an anthology series like Final Fantasy. The magic of this prequel is that within its universe, nothing came before it. Whatever happened in the previous 2 games from a narrative perspective almost doesn't matter. Obviously the game makes reference to them, there's no way it wouldn't, but it doesn't have to take anything previous into account. It's not restricted by the past. It's essentially a blank canvas. Now there are some things that restrict it from the future, like killing certain characters and that kind of thing, but even then the game has fun with this concept, which brings me to my other point. The writing in this game is just more fun and less self-serious than the last two games. And there were some humorous points in the first two, but here it really feels like the game knows just how ridiculous it is, and it's proud of it. It's got all this wacky supernatural shit, and it's not ashamed, unlike the later games which do everything they can to demystify every single aspect of the world. I wasn't a fan of Liquid returning as a ghost arm, but bringing him back again just to reveal that it was hypnosis? Then there's Vamp, who's an actual vampire, except oh wait, I guess he isn't now, he's just role-playing. I think they even hand-waved the Cobra unit's powers with parasites in the Phantom Pain. MGS3 has a man who conjures bees, and another man who shoots fucking lightning because that's fucking nuts and fun. Why does he shoot lightning? Because. Why does this guy live forever? Magic. Why does this guy love or hate space so much? Jury's still out on that one. I'll get back to you. The point is, Kojima is not a good writer. I think he has good ideas, sometimes, but in terms of putting together a well-paced, tightly, smartly written story, he can't do it, at least not on his own. In this game, he uses camp and spectacle to mask his shortcomings as a writer. Whether this is intentional is debatable. Personally, I would say it was a complete accident that it worked out that way, but I would be willing to believe he knew what he was doing. Things that wouldn't have worked in the other games fit in perfectly in Snake Eater. Things that would have been too goofy, inappropriate, or just lame in something like Sons of Liberty make this game even better. I'm less inclined to put everything under a microscope in this game, and so is Kojima. Not everything had to be explained or talked about at great length, though I wouldn't say the game was completely without unwanted exposition and overly long monologues, and the parts that do feature these elements are probably the weakest. Oh, hey boss, what you doing there? I totally didn't see you.
Her name is the Boss.
I think a lot of people would say the boss is one of the greatest characters in Metal Gear Solid, maybe one of the best in the medium of video games. And I'm not here to take that away from anybody or say you're wrong to think that. What I will say is that she's one of the worst parts of this game. Now that's a bit overdramatic because I find most of Snake Eater to be very enjoyable. The boss is not an awful character, but being so crucial a character in this series, one who is indirectly responsible for all of the game's events, so we're told, I would think that she should blow my socks off. She should be stealing every scene that she's in. But every time I see her, it's pretty whelming. We're often told of the boss's legendary combat abilities, told how everyone has so much respect for her that they salute with both hands. And yes, the boss is a badass. She whips Snake's ass like it's going out of style, and she's never backed into a corner. But a badass does not necessarily a good character make. She takes no pleasure in whooping ass, despite her codename being The Joy, because she supposedly likes whooping ass. Instead, she goes through the combat motions because that's what she has to do in the situation, and nothing more. She also doesn't seem to care at all about other people, even when we're told she does. Take Snake, her disciple, who seems obsessed with her. He indicates at a few points that they had a seriously close relationship and that it wasn't as simple as others wanted to make it out to be. The boss barely seems to give any indication that she gives two shits about Snake at all. I think at the beginning when Snake says, "It's good to hear your voice again," she says, "Yeah, same." Or what about here? First scene with the Sorrow. Anytime the Sorrow makes his presence known, it seems like she just remembered she forgot to change her clock for daylight savings. And anytime we see her mention the death of a Cobra member, one of her close comrades, she announces it as if she doesn't even know them. Like here, when two of them are dead, she just comes in and says, "Hey, so two of my close comrades just died? I'm gonna go grab munitions." Volgan fucking gets more upset than she does. She's not mad. She's not happy. She's not sad. She's not confused. She's not even mildly annoyed. It just happened. Hardly worth noting, really. couple of dead friends. There are very few moments where she shows a shred of emotion of any kind. There's this moment where she reaches out to Snake, but they can't even see each other, they're so far away. And then there's her death scene. In her last few sentences, she finally shows a glimmer of fondness for Snake. At this point, it's too little too late. I don't see what all the characters love so much about the boss. Nothing she says gives me the impression she'd be even remotely enjoyable to be around. She seems completely perfunctory in her actions and speech. I get that she's a legendary soldier and all, but the reverie she receives from everyone implies something more that I'm just not getting from her time in the game. Even when she does something to help Snake, it's just in service of her mission. It's the next step, the next objective. No flair, no emotion, just the mission. The strongest point for her is definitely the end. Her big monologue. It's certainly one of the better monologues in the series, but it still has its problems. I'd say about half of it is thoughtful and interesting, and then the other half just makes me roll my eyes or squint in confusion. One sentence will hook me in, and the next will push me right back out. And it's not helped by the delivery. Almost every single line is delivered in the exact same way. Whether she's describing the camo mechanic,
change your camouflage by selecting camouflage from the survival viewer.
Talking about her very recently killed comrades,
The fear and the end have fallen.
ordering takeout. I don't have an example of that last one, but you can imagine how it would sound. The boss is less a character and more of a force, something that Snake must overcome, the nigh unstoppable badass soldier that everyone respects for whatever reason. And she exists in the same game as someone who appears to have a more profound effect on our main character. That's right, in this game, Eva goes through so much more with Snake. Stuff that we actually see. We're not just told about it. Eva and Snake actually have a complicated relationship, because Snake doesn't know what to do with women, and Eva's jumping between roles, making it hard to tell whether she can be trusted. And yet he has to, several times. She even saves him a few times. She seems to actually give a shit about him and others in general. And she had her own mission in the end too. She was playing everyone, but she still exhibited some personality too. And I would argue that based on what we've seen, Eva's betrayal is more incentive for Snake to lose faith in what happened with the boss on a personal level. Obviously, the two things work in tandem because his own government betrayed their best soldier, and that's a systemic issue. But he had personal, intimate experiences with Eva, and in the end she left him and basically took millions of dollars from him. Talk about a breakup. One of the things I attribute to Eva's success as a character? Eva leans into the fun, camp nature of the game. The boss is deadpan 99% of the time, right up to the end. It just doesn't match with everything and everyone else, and it plays on Kojima's weakness as a writer. The circumstances surrounding the boss are unfortunate and tragic to be sure. I still find the ending to be very emotional and impactful. It's definitely helped by the fact that Eva narrates it. The idea of someone giving so much to their country only to be painted as a criminal, a deserter. And that salute gets me every time. But the boss herself, well, she ain't shit!
I've got something in my throat. I need to be alone while I suffer. There's a hole inside my throat. I need to stay afloat for the sun. You better wait to fall. They'll tell you where to go, but they won't